Hi, and welcome back to ConTinual. Tonight on the panel room, we're creating a little bit of a meta experience. We're going to be here talking about podcasting for authors. What happens when writers become content creators? So let's find out who all have decided to join this party and sort of talk about talking. Mrs. Carr, you would be up first.
Hi, everybody. I am R.E. Carr, sometimes known as Rachel, usually known online as Total Recar. When I am not writing books, I am on a couple podcasts, some about writing, some about everything else, but the main one I'm on is Authors and Dragons, where I do a live play D&D podcast as well as other shenanigans every single month. If you want to find me, I'm at rachelecarr.com because the original Rachel Carr wrote vegan cookbooks, and that's not me.
So how to cook vegans?
That's my job in my books about vampires.
I like it. All right.
And Rachel is certainly not vegan. I've seen what she cooks. Joe.
Hi, I'm Joe Compton. I run an online network called Go Indie Now. It is a video broadcast network. I have an aversion to the term podcasting, but that's another story. My network concentrates on promoting independent artists of all art forms, that be film, music, and authoring, which is what most of us do here. I also am an independent author and independent filmmaker, and you can find us at Go Indie Now. Everywhere on social media except for Twitter, because some jerk took that title and wanted $3,000 for it.
That's too bad.
Alledria.
Hi, I'm Alledria Hurt, and my podcast is Their Stories Everywhere with Alledria Hurt. So it's basically a short form podcast, except now I'm doing an entire book. Hee.
Lola.
All right. My name's Lola Lariscy. I started podcasting in 2008. I had a music podcast called Cerulean's Love of Music. And then I changed it. Well, then I wrote my book. And I knew I wanted to podcast my book. So I spent a year of weekends recording my book and releasing it. And I didn't try to sell it because it was not great quality. So it's free on archive.org along with everything else. And I was also in other people's podcasts. Like I was co-host of a podcast called Scannerdrome, which went defunct because of conservative versus liberal. And I was on another one called Craft Beer Nation, which went defunct because personalities. Another one called something about beer, I don't remember, and that just kind of withered away. And then I started another podcast called Cerulean's Love of Pop Culture, but then it took over my life and I wasn't writing anymore. So then I went back to writing, and I haven't really done much podcasting in the last 2 years.
Except for being here a lot.
That's true, but I just show up.
Jay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jay Requard. I'm an author of Epic Fantasy and Sword and Sorcery, and soon Epic Fantasy through Falstaff Books. I am also the host of Pondering the Orb on YouTube, which examines books, music, and more in a long-form podcast format. I also host Where No Bubs Has Gone Before, a Star Trek The Next Generation podcast, hosted by me and my father. You can find us at youtube.com/jrecordofficial, and on my side for my freelance gig, I actually do a lot of content editing for podcasts, anything from like making marketing materials to them for editing, sound engineering, anything that they'll pay me to do. So I've been in this since I moved out here in 2018. I'm in New York, so I really got involved with it then, but Pondering the Orb and Where No Bubs Has Gone Before are my second and third podcasts. I actually had one beforehand called Small Talk Sucks, and that made it to about 65 episodes before it died for personal and legal reasons. But other than that, I'm possibly working on a new podcast with my friend Aaron Tolliver, who's a coder. actor, dancer, so many other wonderful things, and that might be coming soon, but thank you all for having me here tonight.
Rick?
My name is Rick Gualtieri, and I am a horror comedy writer of several dozen books. And if you've been paying attention, you would have been able to find me every week for the last 7 years on the Authors and Dragons podcast, in which on our main game, I play Silas Kane, who is a terrible paladin. And I also serve as dungeon master for one of our sub podcasts called Salty Bastards.
Wendy?
Hi, everyone. I'm Wendy Van Camp. I am the Poet Laureate for the city of Anaheim, California. My background is more in television than in podcasting. My first career was that of a producer-director in the Hollywood area. I did 2 series for the most part, although I worked all over town for practically everybody. The first show was called Musician Discoveries, where I would bring a band into our studio. We would shoot them live to tape and do an interview segment with my host afterwards. And this was real TV with the big machines and the whole 9 yards. My second series was called Coffee House Poetry, where I had my own camera. We would set up in coffee houses, and I would basically record the poetry reading. And again, I had a host that worked for me. And she would introduce the poets and basically be the MC. And then I did all the work behind the camera. And I think between the two, it kept me busy for about 8 or 9 years. I got a little burnt out after about 15 years in the industry. Kind of did a segue into a new career. Became a jeweler of all things. And eventually worked my way into writing. I published my first book back in 2014. And kind of just got by accident, really, writing poetry. And now here I am, a poet laureate. I do appear on podcasts all the time. I find as an author and poet, it's an excellent way to get the word out about my work. And I love coming here on ConTinual. It's a fun group. And I try to come here when I can, when I have time. But I have been a semi-regular on many podcasts, and I'm always looking for new opportunities. So if you do have a podcast, you think a poet laureate might be a good fit, go ahead and look me up. You can find me at my website at wendyvancamp.com.
And Michael?
I'm Michael G. Williams. I write queer, horror, urban fantasy, and science fiction. I have done a bunch of podcasts. Of the ones that no longer exist, my favorite is probably Let's Watch Cop Rock, in which 2 friends and I sat down and watched every episode of Cop Rock, the short-lived musical police procedural of 1990, and then opened a bottle of wine and discussed each episode. That was a lot of fun. My current shows, I will resume in the summer doing a show called Social Distancing Radio, where I read from my work, I read from some public domain work, and every now and then I have writer friends come on and talk to me about their work and what works influenced them. Then for my day job, part of my day job is being co-host of a computer security podcast called Data at Rest. And my co-host for that and I, outside of our day jobs, co-host a show called Arcane Carolinas, where we talk about myths, legends, and modern weird in the Carolinas. And that just won the WRAL Voters' Choice Awards for Best Podcast in the Triangle here in North Carolina. So I am pretty pleased with myself at the moment and pretty high on my own supply. So that's me.
And in addition to, of course, being here on ConTinual, I just brought back one of my old shows, Creating Prose, which is more on the business side of creativity. In the past, I've had Neoteric Alchemy, which was a show about small business and entrepreneurial stuff. I've done a lot of politics, writing, media, technology, all sorts of weird things over the years, including doing a couple of the more arcane and esoteric type of podcasts where sometimes I showed up as the resident skeptic. So I get to play around a lot of different spaces. So when we look at ConTinual, we actually started this in early 2000. We'd been playing with the idea of trying to do it and had a lot of conversations about whether or not anybody would care about anything online. and started talking about it in about 2017, 2018. And in 2020, that's when one morning Gail pinged John and myself and said, hey, so I did a thing. What do we do next? And a couple of weeks later, we dropped our first couple of shows for ConTinual. And thankfully, all of you crazy people have been kind enough to come support us and help us reach a much bigger audience. So Rachel, when you look at the media you do, things like, of course, that little thing called Authors and Dragons and the Calamity Janes, and as well as a lot of the other media and stuff you do. So what does this really do for you as an author? How do you approach it? What does it really do for you?
To be blunt, it allows me to be a shameless whore. And that's what you have to be when you want to promote your work. When you're doing podcasts, when you're being creative, you can often put on a persona. I, despite what people may think watching me on these panels, am a horrifically shy introvert. I'm neurodivergent and often have a lot of trouble promoting my work. But when I can get on a format like podcasting, where I can talk about another subject or some aspect of my book and then throw in a little promotion at the end when I'm already hyped up and talking to people, it's been liberating. And I think it's a great medium because a lot of times if you just go, hey, buy my book, buy my book, buy my book. Did you know I wrote a book? Would you like to buy my book? Would you review the book that you bought of mine? If you do that for more than 30 seconds for a joke effect on a podcast, it doesn't work. But when you spice it in with talking about, say, I do a lot of pop culture podcasts. I can talk about Star Wars longer than anyone. I do Dungeons and Dragons. I do a lot of Stargate and Star Trek. And by talking about that, I can sort of backdoor in about my books. And I think it's a tremendous asset.
So speaking of shameless whores, Joe, so running an entire network, where you're building it's not only for you, but you've suckered in a lot of hosts kind of like we have as well. What does this do for all of you guys? I mean, in terms of promotion, and I get to come over there and play and stir up havoc myself periodically.
Sure. I mean, there's strength in numbers, right? And when you find your tribe, there's a comfort level to that. And as RE was saying before, there are a lot of introverts in the industry of authoring, and even in filmmaking, there is, believe it or not, too. A lot of people who don't want to be in front of the camera, who rather be behind it and stay behind it. But for the most part, it's an opportunity for them to show who they are and their personality and what they do, who they love and what they love. And that in turn is what gravitates us all to each other, and when we find common ground with one another, it's reassuring. I mean, I've created this little nest of really, really great friends that I consider friends outside of this, not just colleagues and authors. And so that's the selfish part for me. I'm terrible at promoting my own stuff. I get constantly reminded by everybody on the shows, if I'm hosting or if I'm around, to say something about what I do personally. I'd just rather talk about everybody else and like everybody else talk. But and that's, and I'm not an introvert at all. So I just like talking about everything. So, I think that's the opportunity there, is just to find a comfort level in a zone that you feel great about being around. I mean, this is a great example. I'm sure everybody here has been on ConTinual before. So, you get a comfort level and you come back and you want to do it and you sign up for these things, and it's great. And I think that's the opportunity that we don't always have. We could do it in person a lot, but we're usually so insulated amongst one another when we're at cons and stuff like that. This gives a wider reach and allows other people who don't go to cons and people who are living in like Greece and Japan and places like that to see us and talk to us and be engaging with us. And I think that's invaluable for an author to have that kind of reach.
How about you, Lola? Because you've done a lot of different shows for a lot of different purposes over the years.
Can you repeat the question?
Well, for you, You've done a lot of different things over the years, a lot of different shows. So, and you're not necessarily out there trying to promote or sell work that way. But for you, what has it done for you?
Well, let me go ahead and say the reason I didn't catch the question is because I was Googling because I felt embarrassed that I remember my last podcast. It was called Very Good Entertainment. Very dear friends of mine, Linda Tepler and Che Dean. And I felt horrible. And we must have made it pretty far because I'm looking at number 77 right there. So, yeah. Well, it does a lot of things. I did start doing it as a way to promote myself, but I realized after a while that no one cared. So that kind of got a little depressing, you know. I'd be like, oh, by the way, I have a book. Oh, by the way, I'm a writer. And it's like, whatever, nobody cares. But then, you know, I actually do enjoy it because I love pop culture. I love TV. I love science fiction. I love books. I love movies. I love it all. So it's also a release for me because I don't have many friends. So it's a good way to kind of connect with people. And now I've got all these people on my Facebook and we chat each other and they care about my life and I care about their life. And I have this whole mushroom cloud of a world that has sprung up from these podcasts that I did.
Jay?
Sorry, my cat's scratching at the door. So my goal when I started pondering the orb, which is one of my two current podcasts, I wanted to review and preview books in the epic fantasy and sword and sorcery genres, but also show books off from my friends who work in the same areas. I also wanted to read out loud their work because it helps me practice reading my own work out loud, which is something I was not good at for a long time. So it's helping me build that skill. One of the big benefits of the show currently is that I'm in contact with a lot of record labels and bands in both the melodic death metal genres and the synthwave genre, which are two very different things, but somehow the show makes them work. But it's let me I actually have a personal friendship now with my favorite singer and my favorite band. We talk to each other. So, there's a social side of that too. The interviews portion of the show really is, I've had Jim on and I've had other people on. I think authors are really talented, really interesting, really introspective people, regardless of how they are socially. And the most interesting thing I find about authors usually are their lives outside of authoring. So I brought Jim on to talk about IT and tech and a lot of those things that are going on because that's what he does in his real world job. I brought on recently one of my friends who is an archaeologist. It's just letting me show off my friends in kind of a different light because I think we all have a podcast that we bring them on. We're like, oh, tell us about your book. Tell us about your journey. But that's kind of a small part of our lives. And I think people have much bigger views and opinions of the world. And I try to give people a platform for that. As for my Star Trek podcast, Where No Bubs Has Gone Before, we started that right after my son Ben was born because my wife is a nurse here in New York. So she was on the front lines all the time when COVID was when the plague was running wild. There was a lot of fear and there's a lot of issues and, I have elderly parents and I was worried about losing them and everything and them not being able to see Ben because they didn't get to see him for a year after he was born. So my dad and I, the thing that brings him and I together first is our love of Star Trek. He's the first Trekkie in the family and I'm the second. So we did this podcast where it's us just sitting around talking about Star Trek: The Next Generation, episode by episode, season by season. And it's not even to get attention or anything. I just wanted to leave my son, Ben, something so he could hear me and my dad because I didn't get to, don't fucking cry. I didn't get to say goodbye to my grandfather when he died. And I don't have any recordings or anything like that by him. And I wouldn't want to pass or my dad to pass without my son being able to know who we were. And in a way, this show gets to help us not only explore a show we love, but also who we are as people. And it's a very personal thing. Pondering the Orb has helped me promote myself a lot as an author and other authors as well. And also, like, you know, start building a community around kind of epic fantasy and sword and sorcery. But I've been going on a lot, so I'm sorry. Thank you so much, but bye. Okay.
And so nice for Jay to think that we're writers and we have interesting things to do. So Rick, how about you?
Everybody has all these deep answers. I'm just going to say, I mean, I write my books to entertain, and I kind of look at the same thing with my podcast. I don't want when I'm on a podcast, I'm not really looking to like teach anybody, give any morals, give any lessons. Authors and Dragons is pure entertainment. It's essentially podcast junk food. You can sit down, you can turn off your brain, you just have a good time. And I mean, as Rachel said, there's also a bit of shameless whoring. And one thing I don't like about, say, self-promotion is once again, people who are just always in your face, buy my stuff, buy my stuff, buy my stuff. I like rules, I like structure. Podcasts have structure. So we can start off at the beginning and say, hi, I'm Rick Gualtieri and I play Silas Kane and here's my books, blah, blah, blah. I can do that at the end if I want. And then in the beginning, I can forget all that stuff and just have fun. So it's kind of like it serves both purposes. I can do a little I can do a little promotion. I can have some fun. And I'm a firm believer in that if I'm having fun writing my books, that will come across to the audience. Same way with when I'm on a show. If I'm having a good time with that, hopefully it comes across to the audience. It just makes it feel more genuine and more entertaining. So really, that's kind of my thing. It's I get out of it because I usually get that high of being like, okay, that was a good show. Now I'm feeling pumped or so. And hopefully people come away having whether or not they're having a bad day or not, they've gotten a few hours away from the world to just have a good time.
And Rick, we would never expect you to have something serious to say at all.
One day he'll surprise us. One day he'll just shock us, and we'll all cry, and we'll be completely stunned.
I will have an hour-long pain soliloquy on the next continual thing I show up on.
I can't wait.
I'm here for it.
Wendy, save me from myself.
Funny how often I'm asked that in my job these days. I kind of got into all this because of Star Wars, and I'm talking about Star Wars: A New Hope before it was A New Hope, when it was just Star Wars. I was 12 years old, and I saw the movie in a drive-in theater with my parents, and I not only fell in love with the movie and the franchise, but I fell in love with filmmaking George Lucas style. And from that moment, I was going to be a filmmaker. I was going to go to USC, just like George Lucas. He was like my idol. And I did end up going to film school, but I could not afford USC. I'm a poor person. I ended up going to Cal State Long Beach, and I got into TV, and I loved it. I loved being up at 2 a.m. fighting the raccoons at the craft table. I loved to be in the director's chair. I loved pulling cable. I loved shooting sporting events. I did everything. And I worked my way up from pulling cables to working cameras to being in the control room and then finally becoming a director. And I did it for like a decade or two. But, Hollywood is a little tough, and especially back in the 90s when I was doing all this. It was definitely a boys' game. And I was usually the only woman on staff, and I suffered a lot of harassment. And one day something snapped, and I just said, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. I'm tired. I just want to be on my own, and I just want to be treated with respect. And plus, I just recently was married, and I was thinking I'd like to start a family. And I thought to myself, let me develop another business that I could do from home while I raise my children. And when they get a little older, then maybe I could go back in the industry and I'd have a bit of a break. So I developed a jewelry business, and it was like night and day. I went from a male-dominated field where I was constantly spat upon, even though I was maybe working 4 times longer the hours and producing twice as much as the guys around me and still was treated with disrespect, to a industry which is almost all women, where I was almost coddled and nurtured, and I didn't understand it at first because it was not what I was used to. But eventually I kind of missed storytelling because that's what I got into filmmaking for in the first place, that original love of Star Wars and telling the hero's journey and all that. So I got into writing. It was something I could do from home. I could sit here in my slippers and type on my typewriter or go to the coffee house and do that. I got heavy into NaNoWriMo. And I kind of left a lot of the production stuff behind me. But, as an author, a lot of times you go to cons, the science fiction conventions. I'm a science fiction writer and poet. And you go there to be seen and to talk up your work. And I found that I really enjoyed it. And I even enjoyed putting together panels for the programming. And I became very good at it and well known until finally I just would show up and they go, Wendy, what do you got for us? And it kind of gave me a front row seat just because I was a good producer. And all these skills came from my television experience or podcasting. As a podcaster, you basically were doing my job in the television studio. I mean, the technology has reduced down in size so much. You a lot of the things that you can do now are more advanced than I was doing with my $20,000-$30,000 machines back in the day. It's really amazing. But anyway, during that troubling time in 2020, when we had the pandemic, all the in-person things went away. And I honestly didn't know what to do. I was terrified at the time, like many of us. I didn't know what to do, where to go. I couldn't write. I was a mess. And then some friends of mine said, well, Wendy, why don't you come on our podcast? We could use another person to be on the panels. This is something you do all the time at the conventions. You'd be a natural. And it was called the Sci-Fi Roundtable Podcast. And I became a semi-regular. And I did about, I think, 15 episodes. It ran for about 2 years. And their thing was during the pandemic that we were all home, didn't know what to do. And they figured it was a good time to round up people and just get stuff in the can. And as a producer, I agree with that. That's a great way to utilize your time. Well, during this time, the cons just slowly went virtual. And I found that I was speaking on television via Zoom all the time. And I got introduced to how all this kind of operated. But I didn't have to do any of the technical stuff. I'm more than capable of it, of course. But it was nice to be able to just set things up as a producer and not have to do all the techie stuff. It was really easy. And I really started to enjoy that. So not only was I putting together panels of poets to come and appear at the cons and building up speculative poetry in general, because it was really unheard of when I started. But as time went on, it became more of a thing. And the membership for the SFPA, where I'm now an officer, they decided that, Wendy, you've been doing all this for us. Why don't we make you official after I've been doing it for a year? And I've been an officer now for a little over a year with them. But basically, our membership doubled from all this stuff that I was doing. And then lo and behold, my city decided that they wanted a poet laureate. They're looking for somebody with community experience in poetry. They're looking for somebody who can get the word out about art forms. That's exactly what I was doing as a podcaster and a poet. As a writer, as an author and poet, being in front of the camera or speaking on podcasts puts my work out in front of a wide variety of people. And I like doing lots of different podcasts for that reason. If it was just me and my podcast, it's just the small following that I've generated. Hopefully, you're doing when you have a bigger following, of course. But when I come on as a speaker and I can go all over the world to different audiences all the time and reintroduce myself, and I've noticed that my sales are pretty steady. I mean, I don't sell bundles and bundles of books, but I do sell regularly. And I think it is because of podcasting and because me as a poet and writer, I'm always in front of a new set of people who become interested in me from what I have to say and learn of me. And I think if you are an author yourself, even if you don't feel you have the technical skills to do a podcast, you should put yourself out as a panelist, because it's the best way to get yourself out on the camera and to speak, but not have to worry about all the back end stuff. Let somebody else do the heavy lifting for you.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about the tech here in a minute or so.
Yeah, but that's one reason why I came on to ConTinual. One, I know Gail from the circuit. I mean, she was someone I knew personally. And so when I heard she had a podcast, I thought, well, that's a natural thing. I'd love to support her and what she's doing. And so I came here. But you shouldn't just stick with your friends. Just put yourself out there and find places to speak. And you'll find that it's a great way to sell your books without having to say, buy my book, buy my book. Because I speak on many topics. I mean, I'm an editor, so I often speak about editing anthologies. I speak about podcasting quite often. I talk about just writing tips. I'm an indie publisher, and I love talking about marketing and putting yourself out there and promoting. But I can talk about many topics. Of course, that's Star Wars and Star Trek too. I'm a big geeky fan of both, and I love talking about that on podcasts. But it's a great place to go, and if you're thinking about it, try to get on a panel first before maybe you start out, and get yourself comfortable on the camera. And I think you'd be really happy with the results.
Michael?
I have a degree in performance studies, and so I am myself a very introverted person, but it's easy for me to be outgoing in public if I can view it as performing a character. And I have found that different varieties of public activity call on like different degrees of creating a character and different degrees of performance. If I'm on a panel in front of a live audience, then I sort of have to view that as a performance in order to get up there and talk. And as long as I can do that, then I'm very comfortable. And if I'm selling books at some sort of event, like at a convention or something, that is far less comfortable, but I can view that as a different kind of character and sort of step into that role. But when I'm podcasting, it's just me, because there's an audience and I know that they exist, but that audience is not like directly in front of me. And my attention span is sufficiently short and my intellect sufficiently small that if they're not directly in front of me, I forget they exist. So it's a lot easier to just be myself on a podcast. I also think that podcasting creates a different kind of experience and a different kind of environment for both the creators and the listeners. Listeners to podcasts want the experience of feeling like they have joined you at the table and are just listening in on the conversation. And that aligns very neatly with what I think works for selling books to people who want to buy books. Nobody wants to feel exploited, but everybody wants to feel appreciated. And book lovers love to feel like they are talking to somebody who loves books as much as they do. So they don't want to have somebody barrel into the library and kick their table over and say, stop reading that, buy mine. They want somebody to join them at that table in the library and say, what are you reading? And so podcasts are a great way to do that. And I don't do a lot of direct promotion. Social distancing radio is pretty obviously a pretty direct promotion, but also as a way of giving away something that I had created. With Arcane Carolinas, every now and then, Charlie and I, with a legend or a monster or a myth or something, will play the what if game at the end of an episode. And I'll say, okay, well, if I were going to use this in a book, if I were going to use this monster in a book that we've talked about, this cryptid that somebody in South Carolina said they saw, then I would probably give it this backstory, and I'll just like make something up on the fly and we'll talk about that. And every now and then I hear that somebody heard that part of an episode and enjoyed it, and so they went and bought a book just to see if I could do the same thing on paper. And at the end of every episode in the outro, we have I give the URL for my site and I give the URL for Falstaff and talk about that for like 10 seconds. And that's the amount of promotion that I do via podcasting, just because people do not want, the audience for a podcast does not want to hear a commercial. They don't want to hear a sales pitch. They don't want any of that. If they did, they would tune into the local morning shock jocks and be done. They want to feel like they have joined somebody in a conversation about something that they care about in the first place, and the opportunity to sit down and relax and also exercise their mind a little bit. And so that's all we do.
Alledria?
I'll make it simple. I get bored easy.
Well, that was quick.
I'm basically the kind of human being, I get bored easy, so I find all kinds of new stuff to do. So when I found out I could podcast from my phone, oh, okay. And I started a podcast. It's the same way I got into publishing. I found out I could publish a book from my computer. Oh, okay. And then it happened, and now I have a career.
Well, and so I think one of the things that I wanted to get out of that, and I think everybody dove really deep into this, is that there's a tremendous amount of work here, and it's a very personal thing. The reason we all do this, I mean, it's got to be a lot of fun, because it's not about just buy my book, because it's boring. You can say that for a couple of minutes, right, Mrs. Carr? But you can, after a certain point, really the purpose of doing a podcast, doing a show, is sharing who we are as creators. It's about sharing our interests, our likes, and telling people this is who we are. And if you like me and what I'm doing in my smart assery, you might also like some of the books I do. But if not, come and stay for the show. Enjoy what we're doing here. And I think this is one of those things that's really important, is that this level of new media, the technology, all the things that are available to us, give us that ability to connect with fans in a way we never had before. So the next thing I kind of want to talk about is, we do this because we love it. It's much like being a writer. It's much like anything else. We may do that to make a living, but we also do it because we love it. Because there's always a lot easier way to make money than being a writer or being in media. And Michael, I know you've got to hop for other commitments, but I wanted to start with you on this question. For somebody that is interested in coming in and starting the game, or maybe somebody that is doing a little bit of it now and wants to know more, let's talk a little bit about what it takes, what the business of it takes to do this, the technical setup, the capabilities, the challenges that go on, because you do a bunch of different shows across a lot of different spaces. So, what kind of thoughts have you got for somebody that's wanting to come in and start it up?
Sure. Although to speak briefly to the thing you just said, I do think another part of it is that as a very introverted person, I am aware that people who like my books probably do want to see behind the curtain a little bit into who I am, but I find that very and so by having a show where I can be myself, they can get a glimpse of that, and I do not have to be there to experience it, which is way more comfortable. So, but in terms of the tech side, so I've worked in IT for nearly 25 years at this point. I have a lot of experience with the tech side. The tech side did not scare me going into it at all. So my first couple of shows, I just set everything up in WordPress myself. I just didn't really rely on any commercial services. I really feel like there are basically two flavors of getting a podcast done these days. One of them is, I'm going to let a hosting provider take care of all the tech side and I don't have to think about it. And that's a valid choice. And that is, in fact, what I do these days, because I don't want to spend my time on that. Because I've had the fun of tinkering around and figuring out how to do it myself already, and I don't need to reinvent the wheel anymore. But the other flavor is I want to really dig into the tech side. I am more interested in how the car runs than I am in driving it necessarily, or I am equally interested in how the car runs as I am in driving it. And so with that first version, I would say just pick a reputable hosting provider. There are a couple of really good ones. One of them is Libsyn. It stands for Liberated Syndication, so it's LIBSYN. The other one is Blueberry, but with no E's in its name. They're both great. They have different sorts of interfaces. They have different strengths and weaknesses. Their pricing plans are basically the same. In the end, it's basically the same either way. They will both give you the information that you need to get everything taken care of and sort of walk you through the process of getting something posted. And they're both wonderful. I don't think there's anything wrong with either of them. I've used both of them at different times. The really deep tech side, learn WordPress. Figure out RSS feeds if you're old enough to have been into RSS readers at some point, and figure out how to create a podcast RSS feed within your WordPress installation and then like dig in and have fun. And there will be a ton of different descriptions out there of how to do all of that side of things. In terms of recording though, it really depends on like how much do you want it to sound like something that somebody got paid to make? Or are you just happy getting your work out there and knowing that it's going to sound pretty good, even no matter what you do? Because we all these days carry a recording studio in our pocket. And it's a device made to pick up sound and record it and transmit it. And you can get apps that are effectively mixing boards that make it really trivially easy to use just your phone to record. And at that point, you're in business. You know, you can get the sound files from that and use that to upload to your hosting provider or upload to your own homebrew installation of WordPress and stuff. And either way, you're good. I mean, there are lots of ways to spend a lot of money on becoming a podcaster. And in fact, I'm sitting in front of a pretty fancy microphone and a pretty fancy arm for the boom arm for the microphone. And I've got, some cool trinkets and things like that everything is hooked into. And currently out of view of this camera, there are a million cables running across this desk. But you don't have to go that way. And I suggest that if somebody is new to this and they just kind of want to dip their feet in, unless their hobby, and this is valid, unless their hobby is acquiring the accoutrement of other hobbies, then I suggest they just try recording themselves on their phone, get a little practice that way, get a little practice getting the files off of your phone, upload it to a cheap hosting provider like the inexpensive plan on a hosting provider like Blueberry or Libsyn, and just see if you enjoy it. Don't spend a ton of money. Find out how much work it is. Find out how much work you're willing to put into it. And then you can start stepping up into fancy equipment and weirder tech side stuff beyond that. But it really doesn't have to be hugely complicated. My first show, we didn't even edit. We just recorded it sitting in a bar and posted it. And that was it. And people loved it. So don't get super hung up on thinking that everything has to be perfect. As writers, especially, it is easy for us to get hung up on thinking that our work has to be perfect and that what we put into the world has to be perfect. We have sometimes been edited to death on things that we love. And it becomes very difficult for us to accept that something that we made was pretty okay the first time. Podcasting is a way for something we make to be pretty okay at the first time.
And it will always get better because see if you want to crank out those first 10 shows. If you survive past that, then maybe it's worth the investment.
Yeah, my rule with any of my shows was we don't post anything until we have 3 in the can. That demonstrates we're all willing to come back, And then to do my exit.
Because I know you got to go to work.
Yeah. You just need my outro of where to find me and stuff, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
website,
I'm Michael G. Williams.
media.
You can find me at michaelgwilliamsbooks.com. You can find my publisher, Falstaff Books, at falstaffbooks.com. You can find me on almost any social media site as at McManlyPants, and as in the Manly Pants clan of Scotland. And you can find me probably hanging out somewhere in front of a computer, untangling cables. Or at arcanecarolinas.com. That's the other one. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you, and I'll see you in a couple weeks at RecCon.
Yeah, see you at RecCon.
So, Joe, much like myself, we make poor choices and we start entire media networks. What's the tech look like for you? What's the circus look like for you?
I don't know the word sleep is anymore. I just don't worry about it. It's probably the last thing I worry about. Honestly, though, I'm lucky enough to have now done this a long enough time that I have a group of people that I've come to trust and bring in and that want to be a part of it. And so it's gotten a lot easier actually over the last couple of years. I was doing it all by myself for 4 or 5 years and literally living it. As we grew and as things started to happen, I was producing more and more shows. We've discovered that live is our friend, and that's probably something a lot of people here have discovered, and that a lot of people probably should look at if you're thinking about investing time into this. Live is a good friend, and it helps a lot with algorithms and things of that nature, which we can get deep into if you really want to. But as far as everything that I do, I spend a lot of time on it, promoting it, putting it together. I edit a lot of my stuff because I'm a filmmaker by trade. So I had to, I had to do it that way. It just in my nature. And nobody else has to do it that way. As Michael mentioned, it probably is better you don't. You just hit record and let it go, and just make it be what it's going to be. And I think that's probably more authentic. But for me, it just didn't work out that way. I like things nice and tight. I like to make them 3-act structure, even in my shows. And I'm just a crazy person. And that's what it takes. It takes a crazy mindset, really. I think if you're creative, though, I think you'll gravitate toward it. And the funny thing is like I have, I've had hundreds of people on my shows, right? And I've had a lot of people it was their first thing that they ever did on video, or the first thing they ever did, as an interview. And you find two types of people: ones that love it and want to come back every single time you're doing something, and the others that you'll never see again. And that's just the way it works. So if you do it, I agree with Wendy. Jump on it as a guest first, see if you like it, see if you feel comfortable, see if you're good, you feel good about it. And I guarantee you'll get the bug and you'll want to do it every time. You'll look for other ones, you'll look for places to go, and you'll see, hey, can I be on this? Can I do this? And you'll just go from there. And then all of a sudden you're running a network like me. So
you too can join the crazy. Lola, how about you? From a tech aspect, from a business aspect, from all those moving pieces, what's it like for you?
I started seriously on Libsyn, and that was $15 a month. So I ended up having to go down to something called Pod Hoster, which was fine, and it was a lot less money. But I'm going to tell you, okay, so when I was doing my own podcast, like my music podcast and my pop culture podcast, I didn't care if I, stuttered or if there was crackling. I just didn't care a lot of stuff. So it was all smooth sailing. I was like, got it out, move on. What's up? What the fuck, right? So, but then I decided I was going to podcast my novel because I have so much experience. It'll be easy. Oh, no. Let me tell you. First of all, podcasting a novel, I had an idea that I might want to release it like professionally. So I had to go back and make sure because silence isn't the same between silences. You think silence is all silence, right? No, you have the silence where there's a in the background, and then there's another one where there's a in the background, and they don't match. And so I spent a year of weekends doing this stupid thing. You had to find a small patch where it was really silent, and then you had to copy and paste over all the interstitial areas to get everything to be the same absolute silence. And it drove me freaking nuts. And one of the reasons I had such a hard time, I lived in an apartment building at the time, and it was 3 floors, and I was on the bottom floor. So they say, go in your closet because your clothes are a natural sound buffer. And so I did that. So I'm sitting there on the floor with my laptop. Oh, I found out. So I put my laptop on my lap. I found out you can hear my blood through the laptop. You can hear my veins. So that didn't work. So I put the laptop on the floor. You would think that would be good, right? So the washing machines in my building were right next to the closets. So I'm listening to my podcast and I hear from the washing machine, whoa, 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 from other people's washing machines. And I'm like, so at that point, I'm committed. I want to podcast my novel. I don't have anywhere to go. I don't even have a freaking car. I already used my one F word, so I'll leave it a freaking. So I just did it. And another thing I had a hard time with, I was not very good with, is I would try to cut out like if I had unusually long silences between words, like if I was like, and then she went to the store, I would try to cut it so it was even. But then when I would listen back, I realized I cut too much of the silence, and it was more like, then she went to the store and she went home and she said hello and she said goodbye. And I was like, and by then I was like, F it, I'm just going to release it to the world. I'm not going to charge money. I don't care. And by the time the year was up, I was like the little lady and my hands were like this. And I was like, I don't care. Just take it from me. And I vowed I would never podcast my own novel again after that.
So Jay, much like a lot of us are doing, it's not only the podcast, it's not only going out with the audio files, it is, YouTube, Twitch, a lot of the different platforms. How do you decide where you're going, especially like when you're looking at Pondering the Orb, different shows?
I have to say, Alledria, Wendy, and Joe hit on this already. It's a really good idea to guest first on something and get a taste for this. I really do recommend that. But also, just starting out technically, your cell phone really is such a great device to just start out with the basic things. Like, that is really a place where people should invest their time in first, because you'll end up using your cell phone a lot, especially if you're like me who has to use YouTube a good bit. Now, I'm not on Twitch. I have a friend who's on Twitch that's trying to get me there, but that's a different conversation. I think Michael made the point about the expensive microphone with the arm and everything. This thing is cool because it does help me record better sound and all that. But if you can learn how to sound edit on your own, you can do a lot with, not even a microphone sometimes. I really tell people to go out there and learn editing software, because that's really where you're going to spend so much of your time, especially if you really get into this. I'm using Wondershare 12 right now, which is a film and audio editing software that just got a new AI package in it. So a lot of fun things to work with. But actually learning, how to really master your sound, how to denoise things, how to really set your keyframes and stuff like that. These are all really important things that take time to learn. And I think one thing that a lot of people who may get into this need to know, it takes time. So take your time. You don't have to force this. You don't have to rush it. And when it comes to the technical aspect, what you need in terms of mics or cameras or stuff like that, I have this microphone, and I had an entire laptop and camera setup and all this stuff, and it didn't work. So I'm now down to working with a MacBook. This is what I'm recording and broadcasting on now, and just this microphone with a plug-in, and it works great. So, it's easy to tell people, go get this microphone, go get these headphones, do all this. Figure out what you really need and just experiment. And when it comes to cost, as much as I don't like sending people to the dark empire that is Amazon is one of those places where you can start finding film and audio equipment for a really nominal price now. That's actually of a pretty good quality if you do your research. There's also B&N, which is a really great site, which is not Barnes & Noble. As far as hosting, which I think is a very important thing that people need to put a lot of time into, because now you have Spotify, you have YouTube, you have Twitch, you have Apple, you have all these places you can go. Figure out where you really want to go, but more importantly, when you start putting together a show, understand what your show is going to be and understand what the limits are in your show in terms of content, because every platform now has different rules from content, from Apple to YouTube to Google to whoever. Really decide what your content's going to be and what your bounds are going to be, because the moment you step out of those bounds and you're demonetized or have your show torn down or lose your entire channel, you're kind of shit up the river without a paddle. So really take your time and just figure things out. There's no pressure on you other than the pressure you put on yourself. And I think that's a really important thing, not just in terms of podcasting, but just in terms of creativity and getting work done. the pressure that you put on you is the thing that determines how well you do at this and how you handle that pressure. Try to make it as easy for you as possible everywhere you can. That not to say that there won't be hard parts, because there's always going to be hard parts to this. Editing, no matter what you do, no matter the new AIs that come out, no matter what happens, editing is always going to take you. It takes me an hour to do 10 minutes sometimes. Like, you just have to put in that time. And that's it. That's it for me.
Rick?
Still kind of stuck on shitting my way up a river, but
Yeah,
Jay
I
is in
know.
New York,
Sorry.
so
And I'm between two shitty rivers.
so what Jay was saying about the equipment. I mean, this headset here, I have a pretty good mic. I have a boom arm. I have like a studio headset and stuff. 90% of what I record is on this $25 Plantronics headset, because microphone quality is probably about 90% of the way there for what for the high end mic I have. But you know what it has that big mic can't do? That big mic catches every friggin' sound, no matter how low I turn the gain. This, I can actually, in the middle of summer, have my air conditioner running and you can't hear it. I have my heater on right now. You probably don't hear it. There's ridiculous noise cancellation. And you know something? It's one of those, the sound quality is good enough and it makes my life easier. Never forget the whole concept of making your own life easier. Everybody else has touched upon the important things. I will just add one thing, which I am constantly fighting with the A&D guys over, and that's, especially if you're going to do anything live, especially with video, is have a friggin' wired connection to your laptop or desktop. Yes, there's some great Wi-Fi out there and all that stuff. Grab a piece of, like, go to monoprice.com, grab some Cat 7, which is going to be faster than anything you're ever going to need, and run that from your computer to your router. And I guarantee that will take care of all the stuttering issues, assuming that you don't have crappy internet. That's the other thing is, have decent internet. If you can. I know not everybody can. Sometimes you're stuck with like Comcast. But
well, there went that
yes.
sponsorship.
Yeah, I'll be hearing about that one later. But yes, wired connection. Because everybody else has touched upon, like, other things with regards to editing and stuff. But also, do not discount your own comfort sometimes, because I have sat here and sweltered through 2-hour-long podcasts because I couldn't run my air conditioner because it just would pick it up. And you know something? That sucks.
Mm-hmm.
May I add something to something that Rick said?
Oh, sure.
He made a great point about his headphones. These are my old headphones. These are my new headphones. They're just uncharged right now. They have a microphone in here that's integrated. These are the Q20s. These are the same company, Anchor. These are the Q35s. These have a microphone in here that's just as good as this now. And this was a $75 pair, headset, which isn't cheap, but it's not the most expensive. Technology is getting better all the time. So the amount of stuff you need is really consolidating down year by year. So like Rick said, really take your time and look into this stuff, because you don't want to spend a ton of money when you can get something really easy that covers a lot of bases.
Go for it, Joe.
Yeah, I would just want to add too, because this is mostly concentrated on audio stuff. Everybody here does more audio than video stuff. There's something free that you need to download right now if you're starting a podcast. It's something free that every person who edits has to have. It's called Audacity. It's absolutely free.
That's what I use, yeah.
It's absolutely free and is like the greatest tool you'll ever think. Lola was talking about silences. Literally, you can capture a half a second of silence and it will remove it completely from everything you're doing. It's very easy to learn. I think that is paramount if you're going to do a podcast that you're editing. Audacity, you have to have it. It's totally free.
Yeah, I think it's the main audio editor that all of us have used for years.
Mm-hmm.
They were the gold standard. And yeah, I wanted to add about the using the AI. there's microphones now that will take out the bad noises that you don't want as you're recording it. That's what I'm using right now. You notice I don't have headphones on. I actually have a very fancy webcam that just sits here on my laptop, and it gives great audio. I use it all the time, even for just audio recording. And it has a function in the program that takes out the extra noise. I mean, I've had my dog barking at the door, the cat scratching, not a peep, nothing. So I love it, and it makes my job as an editor, because I still do edit even after all that, because in the natural cadence of talking, we have longer pauses that don't sound good on audio when you're just listening on the air. So you have to shorten those things, but it's an art because you have to leave enough to sound natural on your recording, but not too much that it's a dead weight. So it just takes time. You'll get there. Thankfully, I went to film school, so I learned back then. I didn't use it for a long time, but boy, it's like riding a bicycle. It came right back when I needed it. But when my turn comes up, I'll talk a little bit about my setup as an author to go out to other podcasts and what I do. So.
Well, guess what? It's your turn. Oh, go ahead, Lola.
Let me just interject. In my defense, I've recorded my podcast, my novel 10 years ago. So a lot of this stuff probably didn't exist back then. I just had the regular microphone, and I knew that I was supposed to run my Audacity, the MP3 back through Audacity to clean it up, but I never did. So, but yeah. So in my defense, it was 10 years ago. It sounds like there are a lot more sophisticated instruments now.
Wendy,
I just want to add, I wasn't attacking you, Lola.
Oh, I know. I just started to feel a little bit like, well, in my defense, it was 10 years ago.
Look, the technology from a year ago is drastically different. I mean, the amount of time I spend on technology. So, I mean, the setup I'm sitting here on, I've got a Yeti Blue mic. I've gone through a couple of them. They handle audio well. I am on the earbuds right now because I just didn't feel like fighting with the speakers that come off. And actually, I want to be able to hear you guys better. So I'm on earbuds, but that's by choice. I'm using a 1080p camera, but I mean, fundamentally, now I won't talk about everything else I'm surrounded by tech-wise right now because of what I do for a living. But in terms of setup, your setup can go anywhere from just this device, and this is an iPhone, but I mean, regardless of what it is, this is a full-blown production studio. The technology that pretty much everybody is carrying in their hands, if they'd have had that 20 years ago, you could produce TV shows on it. I mean, there's more power in the ability to produce and edit. Yeah, I know I'm sending Joe over the edge going, no, but we see a lot of great content being produced on these devices. So you can spend a lot of money, because I can tell you in the main studio where I've got the 4K cameras and some of the rest of that setup, you can spend a lot of money very quickly, but you got to decide that this is something that you feel like you enjoy doing. That's really the main draw. So Wendy, do you want to talk about it a little bit more?
Yeah, I kind of did. First off, for those of you who are beginners, the microphone type that you want is called directional, because there's an omnidirectional, which means direct sound coming in from all directions. You want directional, which means it's coming from one direction. If you're interviewing in person, then you can get a bi-directional microphone. And I'm going to keep it simple because I know there's a lot of beginners out there that are going, what the heck is all these numbers? What do they mean? And all that. And, the techies, they get that way sometimes. I want you to know that my studio is essentially free. Okay, I did buy a webcam. I spent about $50 on it. It was one of the more highly rated Logitech webcam cameras. It has a full built-in program studio included. So if I need somebody says, oh, Wendy, I want you to be on my podcast. Can you record an excerpt of your book and send it to me so I can just include it? I can do that with my webcam and the included software. I just turn on my computer. It could be on my hard my desktop, it can be on my laptop, whatever. And I just turn on the camera and I record it, and I can go up to 4K on the thing. I mean, and again, it's direct, everything is direct into my computer. The camera is hardwired in, so I get great signal, and it does the basic recording. But I don't send that to the podcaster. What I do is I pick up a video editing software that I got for free. It's called VSDS. It has a bit of a learning curve, but there are free tutorials out there to learn. And I go ahead and I run my video through it. All I'm doing is looking at transitions. I make sure that there's not a lot of dead airspace in between what I'm saying and going on to the next subject. If I want to put in some kind of credits, I pop that in the beginning or at the end. A lot of the times the podcasters want to do that themselves, so I usually don't have to worry. But if they want me to do it, I have the capability. I create cards in PowerPoint, and I can just pop that in through the webcam software very easily. So I can bring in visuals, say things that I created on Canva, goes right on in, very easy. Now, if I'm just doing an audio podcast, and I do a lot of those too, again, I can use my webcam to do the recording. I do have a Yeti, and I sometimes will use that too, but then I have to go to Audacity and take out the dead sound with how Joe explained. That was perfect. Or if my webcam, it has AI software, and it just takes it out even in the recording, so I don't have to worry about it. And then again, I go to Audacity, I take out the dead spaces, I listen carefully, and the editing will take a lot longer than the actual recording. Also, when you're recording, try to do it cleanly. If you make a mistake, don't panic, just stop, go to a point before you made the mistake, maybe at the beginning of a paragraph, and just start over, because you can always edit that out later. Keep your voice smooth, breathe from your diaphragm, and all will be golden, I promise. Podcasting is not hard, and it doesn't have to be expensive. For me, I bought a Yeti. It was on one of those Black Friday specials. I got it for $50, if you can believe it. And it's lasted me for a couple of years. It's doing great. My webcam was, I think, about $30 or $40 as well. And honestly, that's it. Everything else is just in my regular systems here at home. I had a laptop for writing. The same one I use for writing my books, I use for my webcams. And I just have kind of a quiet space in the back of my house that I record. But like I said, I have a directional mic. And again, remember, directional, that's the key word. And it only really records me. I don't have stuff coming from outside. I hear it, but I know my camera doesn't pick it up on its mic. So I don't have to be seen with earbuds on or headphones on, because I feel that as a speaker, I'm conscious of what I look like too. And I want to be as natural as possible, as if you were seeing me in person when I'm on the screen. So that's something to consider too. If you feel more comfortable with a headset, go for it. It is acceptable. People will not look at you funny for that. But for me personally, I prefer to go without a headset. But I'm not doing, this is a conversational thing. It's a little different than if you were like reading your book or whatever. If I do decide to narrate books, the audio must be at a much higher standard, or the companies will not accept it. So you're going to have to go the extra mile to put in audio protection, and put up blankets on your walls, or maybe even rent out a studio so you do have that dead quiet, and you can use the better quality microphone when you do that. And again, after that, though, it goes right back to Audacity, so it's no big deal. But anyway, that's my spiel. I mean, I have a very basic setup, but it works. And you know what they say, KISS, keep it simple, stupid.
So, Alledria, for you, because I mean, again, you're doing a lot of shows. You're coming in and reading the books. For you, what's your setup look like, and what are you really wanting to do with all the different stuff you're doing? Because again, you also do a lot of work outside of authoring, out of performing. So for you, what does it look like for you, and what does kind of your schedule look like?
My schedule usually looks like I'm trying to burn myself out because I'm doing things from backward, forward, and in the middle. I mean, so that's basically what my schedule looks like. But as far as my podcast is concerned, it comes out, I try to get it to come out every week on a Friday. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. And I have a varying degree of things, because if I actually sit at my desk and do my podcast, then I run it through Audacity. I have a Blue Yeti mic. My headset is linked through it. And that way I can pick up my audio, and then I just run it through Audacity so that I can clean it up a little bit so that it's understandable. Because being a performer, I don't usually have a lot of dead space in between the way I talk, because I'm basically performing the book. So it's a little different in that I usually have 3 or 4 seconds of silence at the beginning, the total performance, followed by 3 or 4 seconds of silence at the end, just because that's what I'm used to doing, so that you have a very clear entry and outro to the section. And if I'm not at my desk, I have literally sat places with my headphones and my phone, because I use Anchor.fm, which is an app that you can literally have on your phone. And I have done entire episodes using that app because I didn't have time to sit down at my computer and do it the long way. So that's basically how my podcast happens. And then I do Twitch. I do Twitch every day at like 5:30 in the morning. So yeah, I'm the kid that gets up at 4 a.m. So by 5:30, I'm sitting at my writing desk doing something. By 5:30, I Twitch under the name Noir Lady Luck, and I Twitch writing. You literally can watch me write a book on Twitch.
Love you. I'm not getting up that time of morning. At least not if I can help it.
You can catch replays. You can catch replays during for about 2 weeks.
Oh yeah. And Mrs. Carr.
Oh yes, you truly saved the most technical person for last. Most people know me as the person who couldn't find the power button on a Mac and had a total meltdown on a podcast. So the advice I want to give people is, please do not underestimate reliability, backups, and simplicity. You have to practice and learn your craft and do a lot of it. And you know, I have a nice mic. It's currently in my closet. I have soundproofing. It was ripped off by my kitten this week. So I use a headset. When I'm not writing and I'm not podcasting, I'm an accountant. So I'll tell you how to write off the business expense of all this, but I couldn't tell you how to set it up if there was a gun to my head. But it shouldn't dissuade you, because it's something that with practice and repetition, and honestly, messing up a few times, it will teach you what you need to do. And of course, I will have a random cat who's about to walk in front of the camera. So just never be afraid to just keep going with it and keep adapting. And that's how you are successful as a podcast when you aren't a tech.
Well, and seeing as how, you know, we managed to bring on a whole bunch of people that do media, write, and talk for a living, somehow or another we went long. But this is not a shocker with this crowd. Before we get out of here, because I know we have just scratched the surface, so we're going to be doing more of these shows to talk about the crazy that it takes to put these on. But before we get out of here tonight, let's make sure everybody knows where to find you guys, your shows, your books, and all the good stuff. So, Rachel, I'll let you go first.
Once again, I am R.E. Carr, sometimes known as Rachel, usually found online as Total Recar. You can reach me at my website, www.rachelecar.com, and I write urban fantasy, science fiction, and a lot of horror comedy, sometimes even with that guy who's going to show up later in the podcast.
Yeah, you're pointing at the wall. He's over there.
On my screen, I'm pointing to him. Do that magic editing thing. It's a podcast, right?
That's what the video's for. Joe.
You can find us at Go Indie Now, youtube.com/Go Indie Now, facebook.com/Go Indie Now, the Instagram, TikTok is different. The Go_Indie_now, because every time I join a live, somebody go, hey, you go and die now, because it was all together in one word, and so people couldn't discern it, so I put the little dashes in there for that. And then I'm on Twitter at JoeDream73 and on Facebook, Joe Compton. Feel free to friend me. And if you want information on how to be on Go Indie Now programming, please reach out to me. We do casting calls all the time and new shows every year. We do it like a TV network where we run seasons, and I have several shows that I cast for every season. So,
Lola, you're on mute.
I know, I'm back. I thought I fixed the podcast or the website software, whatever website that I was using. It disappeared about 6 months or so ago, and I didn't realize it for like a few months. And so I've been trying to hook my URL, lolalarissy.com, to a Google site, and I finally got it to work. Yay! I just forgot to hit publish. So don't worry about that. Don't even try. But if you want, you can go to archive.org and search for Lola Lariscy, and you can find a lot of my podcasts, including my entire novel, which is not in order. So you'll see like Trudy Limb number 5, Trudy Limb number 24, Trudy Limb number 13. So you know what? It's free. Just look, just take your time. And I got my short stories and a lot of my podcasts there. Oh, and I was also going to say, we should have mentioned this, music. Almost all of the music I used on my podcast was by Kevin MacLeod, and it's free. You can choose to pay him, but if you don't pay him, he wants you to advertise. So I would always advertise, and that's spelled Kevin, Kevin, MacLeod, Macleod. He does great podcast music, great music.
Jay?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jay Requard. You can find me at jrequard.com or at Twitter at jrequard. You can also find me on YouTube for Pondering the Orb and Where No Bubs Has Gone Before at youtube.com/jrequardofficial. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was great seeing all of you and a really wonderful discussion.
Rick?
Well, you can find me everywhere at I am Rick Gualtieri, no matter where you look. RickGualtieri.com, on Twitter, on Facebook, on TikTok. Hopefully you can spell it. You can also find me on the Authors and Dragons podcast, available wherever fine and less than fine podcasts can be downloaded. And if worst comes to worst and you absolutely cannot remember how to spell my damn name, you could just Google Bill the Vampire, and that will bring you to something connected to me.
Wendy?
Again, I am Wendy Van Camp. I'm the Poet Laureate for the city of Anaheim, California, and the con coordinator for the SFPA, the Science Fiction and Fantasy Poetry Association. You can find me at wendyvancamp.com. That's WendyVancamp. I have a portfolio with links to all the podcasts that I've been on, to my poetry, to books, you name it, you can find it there. I have a blog called No Wasted Ink, and again, the link to that is on my main website. And I'm available for podcasts. If you are a podcaster, keep me in mind. Anyway, thank you.
And Alledria.
Should I tell you that I'm the first 5 pages of Google if you can spell my name?
Just the first 5?
Just the first 5. Because after that, it starts repeating itself. And it's still me.
And I've had the... Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Other than that, you can find me at alledriahurt.com. Just spell my first name right. You'll find it.
And that is ALLEDRIA Hurt.com. So, and I've had the pleasure of trying to wrangle this bunch of hens this evening. I am Jim Nettles. You can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentials.net, authoressentialsworkshops.com, the speculative fiction academy.com. The podcast is creatingprose.com. And of course, here at ConTinual, because they'll never let me leave. And I want to thank everybody for coming in and talking about the back scenes of why we do this level of crazy and why we're so happy to bring what we do to you guys. So we will see you again next time. Everybody have a good evening.